So I'm trying to decide whether to get a Mini 3 Pro or an Air 2S. Can you help? Hello, my name is Jonathan Palfrey. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe as always, as it massively helps me out. Now today I'm actually looking more for advice from you guys in the comment section down below. YouTube, what a great place where we can get this sort of information, or maybe not. We'll see how this goes. I want to ask the question, should I be getting the Mini 3 Pro or the Air 2S? And I'm going to just discuss sort of the thoughts I've had in my head since they made the announcement of this new drone. Now, of course, things have suddenly changed in the last 24 hours or so. And there were some really great reviews, such as Philip Bloom's one, and even a great YouTuber, Jason Morris, actually did pretty much the exact video I was going to create just a couple of days ago. Since then, out of nowhere, DJI have released a firmware update giving 10-bit color to this drone, which is absolutely incredible. I have to say, it is a bit weird why they didn't include this, either as just a part of the announcement if they couldn't have actually released it on time, like they did with the Mavic 3, where a lot of the features kind of were held back, but they did announce them at release day. Or why not just hold it back 6 months, say, so that it could be a nice boost of sales when perhaps people are getting a little bit bored of the drone or starting to get a bit dated, and suddenly, boom, now it's got 10-bit color. That said, I am not complaining whatsoever, and it has probably changed the balance of this discussion. So if you have been living under a rock, what makes the Mini 3 Pro so interesting as an actual proper professional drone? Obviously, it is a massive upgrade from the Mini 2. So if you're just using it for hobbies or for travel, for YouTubing, then I think it's an easy decision to be going for this Mini 3 Pro. But if you're shooting more professionally, there may be certain features that you're wondering, is it good enough? Is it good enough to go for that, or should you be looking for the next drone up, the Air 2S? So the Mini 3 Pro now shoots 10-bit in D-Cine-like. It doesn't have D-Log still, so that's one thing that hasn't changed. Maybe we'll see it in the future. Personally, I think it's probably a limitation of the sensor and actually the dynamic range it can deliver. I think probably D-Cine-like is giving us everything it has actually got. The sensor is almost a 1-inch sensor. It is slightly smaller than the Air 2S, but still a very impressive size considering how small the drone is. One thing that is really intriguing is the fact that it's got an f1.7 aperture. Now, this is quite an upgrade from pretty much all the other drones that DJI have made. They've always been 2.8. 1.7 allows in a lot more light, so even though that sensor is a bit smaller, it certainly makes up for it, the fact that the lens is much faster. Of course, the aperture is fixed as it is on the Air 2S, and there was no real surprise there. It was going to add a lot of weight and obviously expense to have a adjustable aperture. A slight shame, but not the end of the world. You can put ND filters on this drone, so you can somewhat control the exposure without having to affect the shutter too much. That said, it's actually not that bad to go for a higher shutter on a drone. I know a lot of people and a lot of YouTubers, they all constantly push this idea that you must stick religiously to the 180-degree shutter rule. And yes, of course, we should try and achieve that wherever we can. However, adjusting it a little bit isn't too bad. You know, having it in the right ballpark is going to be absolutely fine, especially when it comes to drone filming, and especially if you're shooting quite high and quite wide. Where you're going to really notice motion after effects is when you've got something quite close to the lens. And well, frankly, that doesn't happen too often with drones. You definitely want to try and meet the shutter rule when maybe you're shooting something a lot closer and maybe you've got something in the foreground such as a tree. Then you want to see that motion blur because you'll notice it a lot more. However, if you're doing big wide shots, I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that you can't actually stick to the rule all the time. Surprisingly, they actually got the same bit rate in both of the drones as well. This is something I expected that the Mini 3 Pro would be, a lot worse. I didn't expect certainly to have anywhere near the same bit rate that the more expensive drones have. The top package of this drone, which I think is what we are all interested in, actually comes with a remote control with a built-in screen, and it's 700 nits, which, it would be nice if it was brighter. 1000 nit would be amazing because then you can really see it clearly outdoors in daylight. But it is certainly an impressive brightness. You know, it's very much equivalent to most phones on the market right now, and you're not going to have the issues of overheating like a phone can have. I have many situations where my phone has overheated and then the screen brightness just dips, and it's really annoying when you're halfway through flying and, you know, it looks great at one point, you can quite clearly see the screen, you can clearly see the exposure, and then suddenly it goes dark. So I think having a dedicated screen on your controller is actually something that's really useful in a professional environment. Finally, of course, this all comes in at under 250 grams, and that is what makes this drone really special and why I am really interested in purchasing one. So when we look at the two drones, and when I've seen all this footage online and go out there, find there's loads of comparisons. I don't have either drone, so you're not going to see it here today. As I said, this is me trying to figure out which one I should be getting. The reason I was interested in the Air 2S and maybe not considering the Mini 3 Pro was really because of that 10-bit. I think in terms of what I've seen, the image quality out of both of these drones in most cases looks very, very similar. Maybe there are slight differences between the image quality, and maybe the Air 2S does have some slightly better dynamic range, especially because you can use D-Log. But outside of that, it's very hard to spot the differences. They are extremely close in terms of color, in terms of sharpness, noise reduction, everything. Things aren't perfect with it, of course. Like I say, certain things like noise reduction and over sharpening, that is problems that we see on DJI drones, and it's something that will continue, unfortunately, to exist for a little while longer. Now that we do have 10-bit in the Mini 3 Pro, it does bring up a lot more questions of actually why would you purchase an Air 2S? It's not to say there aren't reasons that you should go for one of those. You know, I say the image quality probably is better. You've got obviously the option to shoot 5K as well, but it's much less than before. And actually, I think on paper, if you could only have one or the other, I'm going to lean towards the Mini 3 Pro. It is all about that weight. 250 grams or less means that you can use the Mini 3 Pro in so many different scenarios in most countries around the world. Most countries have set 250 as sort of the definition of when a drone is either, you know, a pro drone or not. And funny enough, maybe this is starting to break those rules. The reason for the rules existing as well, anything under 250 grams is probably going to be a lot less dangerous if it were to crash into someone than a heavier drone, which is great. It means that we can use the drone in more areas, in more situations. In the UK here, we can fly a lot closer to people and a lot closer to buildings. Now, of course, you should always be safe when you're flying, but when you're flying with a smaller drone, not only are the risks going to be a bit lower, but also it means that you can take off in a slightly smaller space, for example, while feeling comfortable about it. It will be less noisy. There's so many little things that just help make using the drone much more sort of socially acceptable than the larger drones from the past. And I think just having one of these drones in your kit bag as if it was like a lens, I think opens up some really interesting new sort of camera shots you can get really quickly. You know, because of the small size and because of the regulations now, it could mean you could just quickly get a small crane shot of a building, for example. Yeah, it doesn't have to always be these big epic shots. It could just be for some quite normal usage in sort of corporate films. I think for photographers as well, and for some of us in video, the vertical mode is going to be something that's going to be very, very useful. Yes, you could always crop the image down from the widescreen image to get your 9:16 image or whatever you want to go for. But that is losing a lot of information, especially when the sensors, a lot of these drones are only about 12 megapixels. You're cutting a lot out by doing so. By going into a vertical mode, it means you can use an entire sensor, which is absolutely massive. It also means you've got a very different field of view as well. If you're cropping, of course, you're cropping in on the image. It means effectively you're zooming in on the image. But if you can shoot vertically, it means you can use the full wide angle lens. So have I convinced myself to get the Mini 3 Pro? Yeah, I think I have. I think 10-bit, once they added that, suddenly it made a lot of sense. Is there a reason not to go for it? Well, potentially. I mean, if you're doing this full-time professionally as a drone pilot, you know, that's all you do, then I expect you probably already have things like the Mavic 3, you have the Inspire, and maybe you don't need yet another drone. But even then, I think there's still really good use cases just to have one of these small drones in your kit bag. It's a different tool for different situations. For smaller video production companies like ours, I think this is a brilliant drone. I think it just makes so much sense to have it as another device to capture videos for your productions. And as I mentioned before, this would be an ideal drone for YouTubers and travelers who just want to be able to capture the odd aerial shot. I've always said that you shouldn't really spend too much on drones. I think, the craze sort of has died off, and people spending thousands of pounds on these drones just for hobbyist reasons seems crazy to me. I love using the drone, but I don't really fly it much actually just for fun. In which case, if you do want to do that, you should stick definitely to the Mini series. Apparently they are going to keep the Mini 2 drone series going, so if you don't want to spend too much money, then you could go down that route. But I think realistically now, even if you're just starting out, I think the Mini 3 Pro is the way to go. So I'd love to know what you think. Do you think the Mini 3 Pro is the right drone to go for, or would you suggest going for the Air 2S? I'd love to know if anyone else has gone ahead and ordered a Mini 3 Pro and what they're planning to use it with as well. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like and subscribe because it massively helps me out, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.